The world measures strength in muscle. God measures it by something else entirely. There was a man who tore a lion apart with his bare hands, who ripped an entire city gate off its hinges and carried it up a mountain like it weighed nothing. A man who made armies scatter and kings tremble at the sound of his name. They called him the strongest man who ever lived. His name was Samson. But if you had found him on that particular day in the belly of a Philistine prison, you wouldn't have recognized him. Blind, chained, grinding grain like an animal, while his enemies circled him, laughing, celebrating, convinced their gods had just defeated his. What could bring down a man that strong? Not swords, not armies. Something quieter than that. A battle fought entirely inside him, against his own pride, his own desire, against every small compromise he told himself didn't matter. He thought strength meant power. He was wrong, and there was one thing his enemies never saw coming. In the dark of that prison, his hair was growing back. Something else was growing too, something he had lost long before they ever touched his eyes. This is the story of how a legend fell, how a man who lost everything found the one thing that actually mattered, and how God met him in the wreckage, turning shame into glory and surrender into the truest strength he had ever known. Lust defeated Samson, the strongest man in the Bible, and the ending shocked generations. Listen, and you can almost hear it. Hammer striking iron, sparks flying off a Philistine forge, over and over, year after year. That sound was the sound of Israel's chains. For 40 years, it never stopped. The Philistines weren't even native to this land. Generations earlier, they'd sailed in from across the sea and carved out 5 great cities along the coast: Gaza, Ashkelon, Ashdod, Gath, Ekron. Now they ruled ground that had never been theirs to begin with. And they didn't just outnumber Israel, they outbuilt them. While Israelite farmers still carried bronze, softer, duller, a generation behind the Philistines already wielded iron, harder blodes, heavier armor, absolute control. If you stood in that field, watching a Philistine patrol pass with iron in their hands and only bronze in yours, what would you have felt? Not just fear, something worse. The quiet certainty that you could never win. But the deepest wound wasn't the weapons. Generation after generation, Israel followed the same pattern. Peace came. Peace turned to comfort. Comfort turned to forgetting God. Forgetting God turned to bowing before the very idols of the nations, crushing them. Only when the weight became unbearable did they finally cry out. This time, the answer didn't come as an army. It came to a small town called Zorah, in the territory of Dan, to a home nobody would have noticed. A man named Manoah lived there with his wife. Scripture never records her name. It records her sorrow. She was barren. In that world, barrenness wasn't just heartbreak. It was a verdict proof. The neighbors would have said that God had turned his face away. If you were her year after year watching other women carry children on their hips while your arms stayed empty, what would you have believed about God's silence? Then the silence broke. A figure appeared to her, alone, in the open field. Not a priest, not a prophet. Something her eyes had never seen before, and her heart understood before. Her mind could catch up. He told her she would have a son. This son would never touch a razor, never taste wine, never live like other children, because from the womb he would belong to God alone. A Nazirite, set apart for one purpose: to begin breaking the grip the Philistines held on his people. When Manoah offered a sacrifice in response, the flame rose off the altar, and the messenger rose with it, climbing into the fire and vanishing into the sky. Manoah and his wife didn't run. They fell to the ground. Not terror. Ave. They had just touched something no human being was ever meant to touch. Months later, the promise became a child. They named him Samson. In Hebrew, the name echoes sun, a small light, born into a nation that had been sitting in the dark for 40 years. A light that small, a darkness that big. What would it take to keep him burning? Most people who took a Nazirite vow chose it 30 days of devotion, then a haircut, then back to ordinary life. Samson never got that choice. His vow began before he could speak, and it would last until the day he died. 3 rules shaped him for life. No wine, not even a sip. No contact with anything dead, no body, no carcass, nothing. And no razor would ever touch his head. These weren't empty rituals. They were a mark carried on his body every single day. This man belongs to God, completely, with no expiration date. His parents never let him forget it. From the moment he could understand a sentence, they told him, "You are not like the other boys running through Zorah. Your life was decided before you took your first breath." As Samson grew, 2 things grew with him. Only one of them could be seen. The first was strength. Scripture places its beginning near a military camp between Zorah and Eshtaol, a place later called Mahane Dan, the camp of Dan. There, the Spirit of the Lord began to stir him. Not a lightning strike, a stirring. Small at first. A boy discovering he could do things no other boy could, without fully understanding why. He was being shaped into a judge. At Delilah, Israel's answer to 40 years of Philistine iron. If you'd grown up next door to him in Zorah, watched him lift what grown men couldn't, seen that look in his eyes when the power came over him, would you have wanted to be him? Or would you have quietly been glad you weren't? Here's what almost nobody saw coming. The second thing growing in Samson never showed at all. God made his hands unstoppable. He never made his heart unstoppable. The same fingers that would one day tear a lion apart could not always say no to a simple desire. His strength was a gift, given to him whole. His self-control was not that. He still had to build, one choice at a time. And nobody around him, not even Samson, seemed to notice how far behind he was falling. That gap between what he was given and what he never finished building is where his whole story would eventually break open. The first crack in Samson didn't come from a Philistine sword. It was already there, quietly forming, long before he ever thought to look for it. 1 road, 3 moments. Only one man who ever knew about all 3. Timnah sat close to home but belonged to a different world, a Philistine town inside Philistine territory, ruled by the very people grinding Israel into the dirt, close enough to visit, forbidden enough that no Israelite should have gone looking for a wife there. Samson went anyway. He saw a woman. He didn't ask about her family or her faith. He went home and told his parents, flatly, "Get here for me." Israel had been commanded generations earlier never to intermarry with the nations around them. Not prejudice, protection. A foreign wife meant foreign gods, carried quietly into the home, one household at a time, until a people forgot who they belonged to. Manoah and his wife knew exactly what that command meant. "Isn't there a woman among our own people?" they pleaded. "Must you go to the Philistines for a wife? If you were his father, hearing the son an angel had promised you, Demand a bride from the very nation crushing your people. What would you have said? Samson didn't waver. He wanted her. That settled it. On the road down to Timnah, a young lion burst out of the vineyards and came at him roaring, jaws wide. There was no time to run, no weapon in his hand. The Spirit of the Lord hit him like a current, and Samson tore the lion apart with his bare hands, the way another man might tear apart a young goat. No blade, no struggle, just raw, unnatural strength ripping through muscle and bone in seconds. Then he kept walking. He told no one, not his parents, not the woman waiting in Timnah. He carried the memory alone and said nothing. Later, on his way back to finally marry her, Samson passed that same carcass in the vineyard. In that heat, a dead body could dry out and hollow, within days exactly the kind of shelter a swarm of bees might choose. And that's what he found inside the ribs of the lion he'd killed. A hive, dripping with honey. He reached in, ate it standing there, then scooped out more for his parents. They ate it too. Nobody asked where it came from. Nobody knew it had come out of a corpse. That single detail broke his vow: no contact with the dead, not even this. And Samson didn't correct the record. He just let everyone believe the honey had come from nowhere. In particular, look at what just happened on one stretch of road. A wife he wasn't supposed to want, a miracle he never spoke of, a sin nobody could trace back to him. If you'd walked beside him that day, all you'd have seen was a strong man doing ordinary things. What you wouldn't have seen was the pattern already forming underneath. Take what he wants, then bury what it costs. He thought the lion was dead and buried behind him. It wasn't. It started as a bet over 30 shirts. By the time it was finished, 2 people would burn to death, a nation's harvest would be ash, and a foreign army would be marching into the hill country of Judah to hunt down one man. The wedding feast lasted 7 days, standard practice for that world, the kind of celebration a young man's family threw, whether or not anyone approved of the bride. 30 Philistine men were placed at Samson's side as companions. Almost certainly, they weren't just there to celebrate. A foreign groom marrying into their town, someone was going to keep an eye on him. Samson, confident in a secret none of them knew, turned the feast into a wager. He built a riddle out of the one thing only he had witnessed. Out of the eater came something to eat. Out of the strong, something sweet. 30 sets of fine linen and 30 changes of clothes rode on. The answer, real money. The kind of prize that could ruin a man who lost it. Riddle contests like this were common entertainment at feasts across the ancient world. But this one had no fair answer. Nobody outside Samson could have solved it. He'd built it from a secret, not a puzzle. 6 days came and went. No answer. The 30 men's pride curdled into threat. They cornered Samson's bride. Get the answer out of him, or we burn you and your father's house to the ground. If you were her married days earlier to a stranger, suddenly staring down men promising to burn your family alive, what would you have done? She wept. She accused him of never loving her. She wore him down for the rest of the feast, and on the last day, worn thin, Samson told her. Within the hour, she told them. That evening, just before sunset, the men came to him with the answer wrapped in a taunt. What is sweeter than honey? What is stronger than a lion? Samson knew exactly what had happened. If you hadn't plowed my field with my own heifer, he told them, you'd never have found that answer. The Spirit of the Lord hit him like a current. He walked to Ashkelon, a different Philistine city, far enough that no one in Timnah would immediately connect the dots, and killed 30 men there. He stripped their clothes and used them to pay off a debt he'd lost out of pure fury. Then he went home and left his bride standing at the feast. Weeks passed. His anger cooled. It was wheat harvest season, the fields standing tall, dry, ready to burn, though Samson didn't know that yet when he came back with a young goat as a peace offering, expecting to see his wife. Her father blocked the door. "I was certain you hated her," he said. "So I gave her to your friend, one of the very men who stood beside you at your own wedding. Her younger sister is prettier anyway. Take her instead." Not rejection. Replacement. If you were Samson, standing on that threshold, hearing that the woman you fought for now belonged to one of the men who'd betrayed you, what would you have felt first? Grief or rage? Or is there even a difference once it's gone that deep? He told himself this time. No one could call him unfair. He caught 300 foxes. Some scholars think jackals, since jackals travel in packs and would have been far easier to catch 300 of than solitary foxes. Either way, he tied them tail to tail in pairs, wedged a torch between each pair, lit them and set them loose, howling, straight into the standing grain. Wheat harvest meant everything was dry. The fire didn't crawl, it exploded. Grain fields gone. Vineyards gone. Olive groves gone, bread, wine, and oil, the three things that fed, funded, and lit an entire economy, wiped out in one night. The Philistines found out why, and they didn't come for Samson. They dragged his former wife and her father into their house and burned it down around them. By the time Samson heard what they'd done, grief and rage had stopped being two separate things. He tore into the Philistines without mercy. Scripture doesn't bother counting the bodies, it just calls it a great slaughter. Then he ran, alone, and holed up in a cleft cut into the rock of Etam, deep in the limestone hills of Judah. He thought he'd disappeared. He hadn't. The Philistines marched an army up into Judah itself and made a demand that had nothing to do with fighting Samson directly. Hand him over, or face what we're about to do to your whole territory. It wasn't just Samson trapped now. It was his own people, squeezed between a man they never asked for and an army they couldn't beat. If soldiers surrounded your town tomorrow and told your neighbors, "Give us this one man, or we destroy everyone," what do you think they would do? 3,000 men came looking for Samson in the hills of Etam. Not one of them was a Philistine. They were his own people, the tribe of Judah, and Judah's land sat right up against the Philistine border, first in line for whatever punishment came next. 3,000 men marching on one man hiding in a cave wasn't an act of war. It was an act of self-preservation. If you were one of those 3,000 watching your fields, your families, your entire territory exposed to Philistine retaliation because of one man's rampage, would you have gone looking for him too? "Don't you know the Philistines rule over us?" they demanded. "What have you done to us?" Samson could have reminded them who put those chains on Israel long before he was born. Instead, he just said it plain. "I only did to them what they did to me." It didn't matter. They hadn't come for justice. They'd come to make the problem disappear. "We're here to tie you up and hand you over," they told him. "If your own people showed up not to rescue you, but to deliver you straight into the hands of men who wanted you dead, what would you have said to them?" Samson didn't fight. He didn't run. He asked for exactly one thing. "Swear, you won't kill me yourselves." They swore it. Then they bound him 2 new ropes, never used, never weakened by wear. Rope, like that, doesn't fray, doesn't loosen. It was chosen to hold. They led him out of the cave like livestock, walked to slaughter. When the Philistines at Lehi saw him coming bound, weaponless, delivered by his own countrymen, they shouted, a roar of pure triumph. The strongest man alive, handed to them gift-wrapped by his own nation. Then the Spirit of the Lord fell on him. The ropes didn't just break. They gave way, like burnt string pulled apart between two fingers, like they'd never been rope at all. Samson looked down and saw a jawbone lying in the dirt. A donkey's, bleached and dry. Another dead thing in his hands. The same rule he'd already broken once before, back at the lion's carcass. He picked it up anyway. What followed wasn't a fight. It was a slaughter. One man, one dry bone, 1,000 armed soldiers, and by the time his arm finally stopped swinging, none of them were left standing. Samson stood in a field littered with bodies, holding a jawbone, breathing hard. He named the place Ramath-Lehi Jawbone Hill, a name that would outlast every man who died there that day. Bound by his own people, freed by a power they never gave him and could never take from him either. Look at the shape of that day. His neighbors, the enemy soldiers, even Samson walking toward Lehi in ropes, every one of them believed the story was already decided. None of them saw what God was about to do with something everyone else had already thrown away. He just won the single greatest victory of his life, armed with nothing but a bone and the Spirit of God. But strength enough to kill 1,000 men in one afternoon isn't the same as strength enough to survive what comes after. Samson was about to find out exactly where his power ended. His arm was still moving. Long after the last body hit the ground, Samson's arm kept swinging pure momentum, whatever was left of the spirit still burning through him. Then it stopped. The jawbone slipped from his fingers. The only sound left in that field was his own breathing. That's when his body sent him a message. No calling, no vow, no miracle could override. He was dying of thirst. Not the kind of thirst you feel after a long walk. In that Judean heat, after tearing through 1,000 armed men with his bare hands, a body can lose enough water in an hour to start shutting down, throat closing, vision blurring at the edges. The same hands that had just turned a dry bone into a weapon capable of killing 1,000 soldiers were now minutes from giving out over something as small as water. Sit with that contrast for a second. If you had just done the impossible, if you'd just felt God move through your own body, would you have expected to nearly die from something this human, this small? Samson had a choice. He could have staggered off looking for a well on his own strength, the same way he'd handled everything up to this point. Timnah, the wife, the foxes, Ashkelon. Take what he wanted. Handle it himself. Instead, for the first time in the whole story, he didn't demand anything. He asked, "You have given this great victory into your servant's hand," he said, "and must I now die of thirst?" No command in it. Nothing like the man who once told his own parents, "Get her for me." Just someone completely emptied out, admitting that the power strong enough to kill 1,000 men couldn't produce a single cup of water, because it had never been his power to begin with. God answered him right there at Lehi Jawbone Hill, ground still littered with the weapon he'd used. Scripture says, "A hollow place split open in the rock, and water came pouring out." That region of Judah sits on soft limestone, laced underground with natural hollows and springs, the kind of terrain where water can break through rock without needing a new law of nature to explain it. Maybe that was the whole point. God didn't need a bigger miracle. He just needed Samson to finally ask for one. Samson drank. His throat opened. His strength came back, and so did something quieter than strength. He named the place En-Hakkore, the spring of the one who called out. Not the spring of the strong man, not the spring of the jawbone, the spring of the man who finally asked for help. For one afternoon, standing in a field full of the dead, Samson understood something most people spend a lifetime avoiding: the same hands God uses to do the impossible are still just hands. They still get thirsty. They still need someone bigger than themselves to survive the day. He understood it completely. The only question left was whether he'd still remember it the next time. He didn't think he needed to ask. Gaza was the deepest Philistine city, further from Israel, further from help, further from anyone who might come looking for him than anywhere Samson had gone before. Its gate wasn't just a door. 2 massive wooden leaves hung on stone posts, sealed at night by a crossbar thick enough to stop a battering ram. Every person sleeping inside those walls trusted that gate with their lives. By now, 2 decades had folded into Samson's legend. Scripture sums up his whole career in a single line: 20 years, leading Israel in the days of the Philistines, as if an entire generation had lived and died while this one man's story kept unfolding. Samson walked through Gaza's gate anyway. Alone. Not to fight. Not to strike a blow for the people he was raised to deliver. He went to a prostitute. Let's not dress that up. This is the man, an angel promised, before he was even born. The man raised under one rule his whole life: your body isn't your own. It belongs to God. The man whose bare hands tore a lion apart like it was nothing. The man who killed 1,000 armed soldiers in one afternoon with a dry bone because the Spirit of the Lord came on him like fire. That same Spirit was still on him. It never left him. It's what made him Samson. And that night, it didn't stop him from walking into enemy territory to pay for sex. Nobody dragged him there. Nobody tricked him. He knew exactly who he was. He did it anyway. The Spirit could make him unstoppable. It never made him obedient. Those are 2 different things, and Samson kept mixing them up his whole life. Word travels fast inside city walls. Someone recognized him before dark: Samson is here. And by nightfall, Gaza already knew exactly what to do about it. They didn't break down the door. They didn't rush him in his sleep. They surrounded the building and waited, patient, silent, at the one place he'd eventually have to pass: the gate. In that world, city gates only opened at first light. Trap a man inside overnight, and dawn hands him to you for free. At daybreak, they told each other, "We kill him." If you were one of those men crouched in the dark outside that gate, certain you finally had him cornered. No miracle in sight. Nothing between you and a clean kill at sunrise. How sure would you have felt? Dawn never got the chance to prove them right. At midnight, Samson got up, walked straight to the gate, meant to keep the entire city safe until morning, and tore it apart. Not just the doors, the 2 stone posts they hung on, the crossbar sealing it shut, all of it ripped loose like it had never been built to last a single night. He hauled the whole structure onto his shoulders and started walking, not to hide it somewhere close. Toward Hebron, deep inside Israelite territory, nearly 40 miles away, uphill the entire distance, in the dark, alone. He carried Gaza's front door to the doorstep of his own people and left it standing on a hilltop in plain sight for anyone to find. It wasn't an escape. It was a message. Your walls mean nothing to me. Here's the part worth sitting with. The same night, the same man strong enough to tear a fortified gate off solid stone and haul it 40 miles uphill, and too weak to say no to a bad decision walking through that gate in the first place. His arms could move anything set in front of them. Nothing in him yet knew how to refuse himself. That was the same gap that had been quietly forming since he was a boy, the strength he was given whole, and the self-control he never finished building. 20 years of getting away with it hadn't closed that gap. It had only made it wider and made him more certain he'd never have to pay for it. Something was waiting for him that no gate, no army, no city wall had ever managed to be. It was waiting in the Sorek Valley, a fertile, low stretch of land where the hill country of Judah quietly gives way to Philistine ground, a border that never held cleanly on either side, fitting, maybe, for what was coming. Her Name was Delilah. And unlike the mob from his own tribe, the army waiting at Lehi, or an entire city lying in ambush at its gate this time, no one would need to surround him at all. 5 Philistine rulers sat down with one woman and agreed on a price: 1,100 pieces of silver. Not for her time, not for her company, for one piece of information. How do you break this man? That's how this part of the story actually starts. Not with Samson falling in love, with a business deal he never knew existed. By the time he showed up at her house in the Sorek Valley, the money was already on the table. He thought he was falling in love. Maybe he was. Maybe it was loneliness. Maybe it was the same thing that had run his whole life since Timnah, wanting something so badly he stopped asking questions about it. None of that mattered to Delilah. She didn't need to feel anything back. She just needed him talking. "Tell me where your strength comes from," she said. "What would it take to tie you up and make you helpless? If someone you were sleeping next to asked you that, out of nowhere, would alarm bells go off? They should have. They didn't. Not for Samson. He lied to her the first time. "Get 7 bowstrings," he said. "Fresh ones, still green, not dried out. Tie me up with those." She tied him exactly like that. Philistine men were already hiding in the next room, waiting. "Samson, the Philistines are on you." He snapped the bowstrings like wet string. The men hiding never even got the chance to move. She tried again. "You lied to me. Now tell me really, how do I tie you up?" "New rope this time," he said. "Rope that's never once been used." Samarum. Same men hiding. Same cry, "The Philistines are on you, Samson." The rope came apart like it had never been tied at all. Third time, she pushed harder. "You're still making a fool of me. Tell me the truth." His answer got closer to the real thing. Now, close enough to feel dangerous. "Take the 7 braids of my hair," he said. "Weave them into your loom and drive the pin through to lock it down." She did it exactly like that, while he slept. Then the same 4 words. "The Philistines are on you, Samson." He woke up, ripped the pin and the loom out of the wall like they were made of straw, and walked out untouched. 3 tests. 3 times he walked away whole. And Delilah still didn't have what she was being paid for. Most men would have taken the hint by now. Someone lying next to you asks 3 separate times how to make you helpless. That's not curiosity. That's reconnaissance. Samson had watched it happen 3 times in a row and went back to her a 4th. This time, Delilah stopped asking about ropes. "How can you tell me you love me," she said, "when you won't even trust me with the truth? 3 times now you've made me look like a fool. 3 times you've lied to my face. No bowstrings this time. No ropes. Just this, day after day." The same handful of words, said 100 different ways, over and over, until he couldn't hear anything else. The Bible doesn't soften what that did to him. It just says he got sick of it. Sick to death of it, her voice, her questions, the pressure that never once let up, until answering her felt easier than surviving one more day of the asking. If you've ever given someone an answer just to make the arguing stop, not because you agreed, Just because you were worn all the way down, you already know exactly where Samson was standing. He told her everything. "No razor has ever touched my head," he said. "I've been a Nazirite, set apart for God, since before I was even born. Cut my hair, and the strength goes with it. I'd be as weak as any other man." This time, Delilah knew. Not a guess. Not another test. The truth, straight from him. She let him fall asleep with his head in her lap. Called a man in, and while Samson slept, someone shaved away all 7 braids, hair that had never once been cut in his entire life. Then, one more time, the same 4 words that had woken him up safe 3 times already. "Samson, the Philistines are on you." He opened his eyes and did what he'd always done. Got up, shook himself off, reached for the strength that had never once failed him. It wasn't there. And here's the sentence that stops this whole story cold, not because of what was about to happen to his body, but because of what he still didn't know. He didn't know the Lord had already left him. They didn't kill him. Killing him would have been mercy, and mercy wasn't the plan. They wanted him alive, awake, and broken, a message his own body could keep sending, long after the fighting was over. They gouged out both his eyes. Then they shackled him in bronze, heavier, harder, more permanent than any rope or bowstring they'd wasted on him before. Bronze doesn't snap because the spirit surges through a man for 1 second. It halts. And then they marched him to Gaza. Same city. Same gate, or what used to be a gate, before he tore it off its hinges years earlier and carried it 40 miles up a hill just to prove he could. Now they walked him back through that same broken entrance, blind, in chains, straight to the prison house, to grind grain like an ox. Every step from that gate to the mill, he was walking ground he'd already beaten once. He just couldn't see a single stone of it anymore. Grinding grain by hand wasn't skilled work. In that world, it was work left to women, to slaves, to animals, never to a free man, and certainly never to the strongest man Philistia had ever managed to chain. Putting Samson on that wheel wasn't about flour. It was a show. Every guard who walked past could measure, in one glance, exactly how far he'd fallen and exactly who had put him there. Philistines came by just to look. Men who used to run at the sound of his name now leaned on the bars and laughed. Somebody spat. Somebody probably said his name out loud, mockingly, right in front of him, knowing he couldn't see who'd said it. If you were the one turning that wheel blind, humiliated, listening to your enemies laugh through the bars every single day, what would you have thought about, hour after hour, in the dark? Something was moving in that prison. No guard could see, because it wasn't happening in the yard. It was happening inside Samson. For the first time since he was a boy back at Mahana Dan, he had nothing left to lean on but God. No eyes to chase another woman with. No feast to boast at. No gate left to tear down just to prove a point. Just a wheel, the dark, and hour after hour with nothing left to do but think. And his hair started growing back. Nobody in that prison thought twice about it. Why would they? They'd already taken what they thought mattered. His eyes, his freedom, his pride. A few inches of hair on a blind slave grinding grain looked like nothing at all. They were still counting the wrong thing. Samson, somewhere in that darkness, was finally starting to understand what the hair had always actually meant. Not magic in the strands themselves, but a life handed over completely, no conditions attached. The vow his parents made before he could even talk was turning, for the first time, into a choice he was making on his own. He'd spent his whole life chasing whatever his eyes wanted. Now the eyes were gone, and something else in him, something buried under 20 years of getting his way, was finally starting to wake up. Outside those walls, Gaza kept moving without him. And soon the whole city started preparing for something bigger than an ordinary day. A festival, packed with people, built around thanking their god Dagon for handing them a victory they were sure was already sealed. Every fortress has one place where it can be broken. Nobody in that temple knew where Gaza's was. Samson was about to find it with his own 2 hands. Dagon was the chief god of the Philistines, tied for centuries to grain and harvest, the exact thing Samson had spent months grinding by hand, blind, in a Gaza prison cell, fed on whatever his own hands produced. Today, in the temple built to honor that same god, the credit for putting him there belonged to Dagon, not to iron, not to Delilah, to a god made of stone. Our God has handed our enemy over to us, they said, out loud, to a packed room, meaning every word of it. By the time the festival reached its peak, the temple had no room left. Rulers, warriors, wives, children, thousands, packed shoulder to shoulder across the floor. Another 3,000 crowded onto the roof alone, leaning over the edge for a better view of what was happening below. Somebody, drunk on wine and victory, shouted the idea that would end up killing everyone in that building. Bring out Samson. Let him perform for us. They pulled him out of the mill house and walked him through the crowd, blind, stumbling, a hand on his shoulder, guiding every step. They made him perform, turn, dance, grope his way across the floor, while the crowd howled. The strongest man Philistia had ever fought, reduced to a party trick in front of thousands of people who used to run at the sound of his name. If you were standing in that crowd, laughing along with 3,000 strangers at a blind man stumbling for your entertainment, would any part of you have felt uneasy? Or would the wine and the noise have drowned that out too? Nobody in the room was thinking about pillars. Philistine temples from this period, like one excavated at a site called Tel Kasile, weren't held up by rows of columns spread evenly across the floor. The entire roof rested on 2 wooden pillars standing close together on stone bases, close enough that a man walking between them could reach out and touch both at once. Somewhere in all that noise, Samson leaned toward the boy holding his arm as servant. Too young, too low-ranked for anyone else in the room to notice, and said something quiet enough it barely carried past the boy's ear. "Put my hands on the pillars," he said. "Let me lean on them a moment." It sounded like nothing. A tired, blind fighter wanting to rest his legs. The boy walked him there without a second thought and stepped back. Samson reached out. His fingers found stone cool, solid, holding up a roof packed with more people than he'd ever faced in open battle. One hand on each pillar, close enough together that his arms spanned both at once. Then he prayed. It wasn't a clean prayer. There was still anger in it, a debt he wanted settled for his eyes, for everything they'd taken from him since. But underneath the anger was something new. For the first time in his entire life, Samson wasn't asking God for strength to get what he wanted. He was asking for strength to give his life away. If you were him in that moment, blind, humiliated, arms wrapped around the 2 things holding up a room full of your enemies, what would you have prayed for? Escape, revenge, or something you didn't have a name for yet? "Remember me," he said. "Just once more, let me pay them back for my eyes." And the spirit that had gone silent the night his hair hit the floor came back. "One final time. Let me die with the Philistines," he said. Then he pushed. Not a punch. Not a strike. His whole body, all his weight, driving both pillars outward at once. The stone didn't hold. It cracked in 2 directions. and the roof it had carried for who knows how many years came straight down on everyone underneath it. The rulers who'd paid for this festival, the crowd who'd come to laugh, the 3,000 watching from above, who suddenly had no floor left to stand on. Dust. Screaming. Then, almost as fast as it started, silence. Samson died there too, buried under the same stone as the people he brought down with him. Scripture closes the account with one line heavier than anything else in his whole story. He killed more Philistines in that single moment of dying than in every year he'd spent alive. They named him Little Sun, the day he was born, one small flicker of light in a nation that had been sitting in the dark for 40 years. He went out inside the loudest, most crowded room he ever stood in. But before the dust even settled, that one flicker had done more damage to Philistia than 20 years of foxes, jawbones, and broken chains ever managed to do combined. After the dust settled, it was quiet. His brothers came down to Gaza, not to fight, not to rescue him. There was nothing left to rescue. They came to dig through the rubble and find a body. They found him, carried him out from under the same stone that had just killed 3,000 people, and brought him home to the hill country between Zorah and Eshtaol. That was the same ground where, decades earlier, the Spirit of the Lord first moved in him as a boy near Mahane Dan. He started there. He ended there. They laid him in his father Manoah's tomb. 20 years he judged Israel. That's the number Scripture gives us. 20 years, and one final moment that hurt the Philistines worse than all the other 19 combined. Read that sentence twice, because it's strange. He killed more people in his death than in his entire life. Not at his strongest, not on his best day, tearing a lion apart, or standing over 1,000 dead men at Lehi. His biggest victory came the one time he stopped trying to win. Here's why. His strength wasn't new that day. It had been in him his whole life, the same spirit that stirred him near Zorah as a boy, the same power behind the lion, the jawbone, the gates of Gaza. What was new was what he finally did with it. Every other time, he'd used that strength to take something, a wife, a woman, a fight. Nobody asked him to start. This time, for the first time, he used it to give something up. His own life, on purpose, to save people who couldn't save themselves. That's the whole story in one line, if you want it. Samson spent 20 years being strong. He spent one moment surrendering. The one moment outweighed the 20 years. It would be easy to read his story as only a warning. It is one. A small compromise, left alone and unconfessed long enough, can cost you everything you were ever given. That's exactly what happened to him. A wife he shouldn't have demanded. A secret he shouldn't have handed over just to end an argument. A door in his own heart he never once learned to close. But the warning isn't the last word. Centuries later, a letter written to struggling believers listed Samson by name right alongside Gideon, Barak, Jephthah, David. Every one of those names belongs to someone who failed badly, publicly, more than once. And the writer still filed them all under one heading: remembered for their faith. Not their record, their faith. That's not the Bible pretending Samson was clean. It's the Bible telling you your worst chapter doesn't get to write the ending. There's one more detail worth sitting with. He died with both arms stretched out, one hand on each pillar, giving his own life to save people who had no way to save themselves. Centuries later, on a different hill, another man stretched his arms out the same way, for the same reason. Samson pushed, and a temple came down. Jesus stayed on a cross, And something far heavier than a temple came down with him: sin, death, every wall standing between God and the people he loved. Samson isn't that story. He's a rough outline of it, drawn centuries early. But the shape is already there. Real strength was never about staying standing. It was about what a person is willing to lay down. So ask yourself the question. This story is actually asking you, the thing you regret most, the choice you still haven't forgiven yourself for, what if that's not disqualifying you from anything? What if it's exactly the material God plans to use? Maybe you've never sat in a literal prison, but you know what it feels like to grind through the same day, on repeat, chained to a mistake you can't take back, wondering if you already used up whatever chance you had. That's Gaza. Samson's had stone walls. Yours might just be a memory you keep replaying, or a habit you can't break, or a version of yourself you hope nobody looks at too closely. Samson's story says the same thing to you that it said to him in that cell. Your past doesn't get the final say. God didn't cancel Samson's calling because Samson broke it over and over. He met him in the dark, in chains, at the millstone, and gave him one more chance to do the one thing his pride had never once let him do: surrender. He isn't finished with your story either. If any part of this felt like your story, send it to someone who needs to hear it. Someone still trying to stand up one more time. Someone convinced it's too late for them. Samson isn't remembered because he got it right. He's remembered because at the very end he let go. Not perfect, redeemed. If you're grinding through your own dark season right now, hold on to this. The hair grows back. The strength isn't gone for good. God isn't finished writing your story yet.